Hey everybody, it's Michael Shermer. It's time for another episode of the Michael Shermer Show. This brought to you by, as always, Skeptic Magazine and the Skeptic Society. We are a 501c3 nonprofit education organization which you can support by going to skeptic.com/donate. If you want to support the magazine, the society, our media efforts, the podcast, and so forth, that's the place to do it. You can get your latest issue of Skeptic, which I will remind you all is in print, available at bookstores everywhere. Our latest issue on energy matters. The next one comes out next month on education matters. That's our next one. So lots of different themes coming up. We have health matters after that. And we've covered trans matters, abortion matters, race matters, nationalism matters, and energy matters. So there you go. All right, let's get on with our show today. My guest is Lee McIntyre, the returning champion. He's been on the show before. He's a research fellow at the Center for Philosophy and History of Science at Boston University. He's formerly executive director of the Institute for Quantitative Social Science at Harvard University. He's taught philosophy at Colgate University, Boston University, Simmons University, Tufts Experimental College, and Harvard Extension School. He's the author of Dark Ages, Post-Truth, The Scientific Attitude, and How to Talk to a Science Denier, which we discussed in our previous podcast episode. His new book is here. Here it is, on Disinformation, How to Fight for Truth and Protect Democracy. It's blissfully short. You can just get right through it in an hour or two, which is really nice because a lot of books I get for the show are massive tomes that take me a week to get through. So I really appreciate it. Of course, I already know your work, Lee, pretty well, so this was a lot of fun. What inspired this particular one?
Well, as you know, I've been on the topic of belief and truth and justification and defending science for a long time now. And I had written several books before that you just mentioned. And I always felt like there was a piece to the story that was missing because my last book was How to Talk to a Science Denier. And so, I was thinking about, well, what do you do when somebody already believes that vaccines don't work or that climate change isn't real? And as you know, in that book, I talked about how to talk to them, how to try to get them to change their mind. And then all of a sudden, I realized that I needed to turn the telescope around and think not about the people who were believing it, but who was creating the information that they were believing. How did they come to those beliefs? And the more I thought about it, thinking about science denial, it occurred to me that it was disinformation, that misinformation is an accident, but disinformation is a lie. I mean, nobody wakes up one day and wonders whether there's a Jewish space laser causing the California wildfires or, things like that, or microchips in their vaccines. That doesn't just occur to someone. They heard that from someone, and the person they heard that from is a liar who wants them to believe it and wants them to, help them by believing this falsehood. And then the more I thought about it, I realized, that's not just true for science denial. That's true for other kinds of denial too. And it was a short hop over to Trump because, as you know from my previous work, I maintain that the science denial blueprint is the same blueprint that Trump used for election denial. The road is the same. The tropes of bad reasoning are the same. And so, is there disinformation behind election denial? Yes, and we even know who, and we know why he's doing it. And so that's when I wanted to write this book. And it didn't take a lot. I mean, it's just a little bit over 100 pages because it's kind of the coda. It's when I realized, oh yeah, there's this other piece that I forgot to say. It's the cherry on top. And it is a very tiny book intended to just fit in your back pocket and, carry with you.
You right here, let's see, here it is. We've got less than a year to figure this out. Now that Kevin McCarthy and the Republican faithful have succeeded in retaking the House in the 2022 midterm elections, which means that the GOP was effectively rewarded for having embraced Trump's big lie in 2021, they're perfectly positioned to install Trump, or whomever they like, as president, no matter the vote count in 2024. After that, some wonder how close we'll be to Orwell's nightmare of 2 + 2 = 5 in the basement of the Ministry of Love. That's pretty dramatically. I don't
Yeah.
know if I share that kind of
Okay.
doomsdayism. We have President Biden now. The transfer of power was done more or less peacefully, except for January 6th. But and nothing bad as particularly has happened since then. The country has continued on as usual. So let's carry out the thought experiment. Let's say Trump
Hmm.
does win. He gets the
Hmm.
nomination. He overcomes DeSantis and Chris Christie and all the rest, like he did in 2015 over his Republican rivals, which look like it's happening. And he's face to face with Biden. He could win. And what was in 2020? What he had 74 million votes. He could get even more than that. He could get 80 million or whatever. Possible. What, in your view, is the road from there to the end of our republic?
Um, I have some speculation. It's based on some work that other folks have done. But part of it, I mean, just the opening salvo here is to listen to what Trump himself has said. He's planning to gut the civil service, replace the people in the civil service with loyalists, to make the Justice Department, more or less his personal arm to go after his enemies. I mean, he said, I am your vengeance. I don't think it's tough to figure out that he's modeling himself on Viktor Orban, even Vladimir Putin, in terms of what he wants to do. So the question is not, would Trump like to subvert democracy? Would he like to institute democracy? It's, could we stop him? And I think the time to stop him is now, before the election, because in your thought experiment, once he's already won, I'm not sure how to stop him after that. I mean, in some ways, I mean, I think back to the Russian Revolution. I mean, the 1905 was a warm up for 1917. They learned what to do. Trump knows what he wants to do, and I think would have an easier time instituting it. And I I shudder to think how we could, if we could survive, the democracy could survive pushing back at that point. And let me just throw in one issue here that's I think relevant. Um, you had said, we survived in the 2020 election. Biden was elected. Things were okay. And yes, but one thing that's happening this time is that the disinformation is even more prevalent now than it was in 2020. I mean, Trump has somehow gotten people to believe that the Russians are no longer interested, or that they were never interested, that they never did anything. That's, I mean, part of his big lie. But in fact, the disinformation campaign surrounding the 2024 election has already started. Trump doesn't need to convince his more people to vote for him than voted for him last time. What he needs is to convince the Biden people to stay home. And with third party candidates, with some well timed disinformation, a few more newscasters both siding issues, or, spending their entire newscast talking about how old Biden is, we just might get there. I mean, some of that is a result of disinformation, some of it is foreign disinformation, some's domestic. But, we saw what disinformation did in 2016. I'm the social media companies were a little bit more attuned to the problem in 2020. I'm not sure what's going to happen in 2024. I don't want to gamble.
Hmm. So there's unlikely to be anybody in the Republican primaries who would break off and run as an independent and draw votes away from Trump. But that could happen to Biden if RFK
Yep.
Jr. decides he's going to be an independent. What do you make of his candidacy and why he's popular amongst Democrats and liberals, and even some centrists and right of center?
I think a lot of people are a lot of people are always looking for a way out. What do we really want a rerun of 2020? And so they're flirting with this idea. Plus, he's a Kennedy, so he's got instant name recognition. I think that a lot of people don't understand just how much of a conspiracy theorist he is, just how much, I mean, we all know about the anti-vax conspiracies, but there's a lot more going on with him. And I just heard a podcast the other day, I guess it started out as a radio show, Magna Chakrabarty on Point, talking about, not about Kennedy, but about the, what's the other one called? No Labels. There's another third-party threat, which is perhaps even more worrisome than Kennedy, because I'm not sure, she never really got into the issue of what the money was behind it. You know, who was actually behind it. I'm not convinced that it's a good faith organization that really believes what they say they believe. I'm prepared to think that there's some GOP money behind it, that, you know, they understand that they'll be taking votes away from Biden. They've said some illogical things along the way that make me think, you know, they said, oh, you know, well, if it looks like, you know, we're going to be a spoiler, we'll bow out. But then they say other things that contradict that. So the third party thing has got my attention. But I have to say what's really got my attention even more, the umbrella that's got my attention, is the prospect of disinformation, because we really have not learned how to fight that yet. And I think that one reason for that is that we don't know that we're in a disinformation war. When you hear the cable news talking about it, and I don't just mean Fox, I mean kind of all of them, they talk about misinformation. They make it sound like it's all a mistake. It's all an accident. They report on it like it was a hurricane. You know, just hunker down. There's nothing we can do about it. There's one commentator on MSNBC at 4 p.m., Nicole Wallace, does a great job, always identifies disinformation as disinformation. I think we need to prepare in that way, that we're in a disinformation war, and that's what's going to help us before the next election.
Yeah, I've been following RFKJ, as Megyn Kelly calls him, fairly closely. I watched the whole 3 hours of him on Rogan.
Wow.
And, you know, there's just a ton of bullshit. You know, he's following in the Steve Bannon mode of you just flood the system flood it with shit, or whatever his quote was, right? Flood it with bullshit.
Or the zone.
And then no one knows quite what to think. So, but part of the problem is some of the stuff he says is true when he talks about, say, the regulatory capture by big tobacco companies and big pharma. I just watched the Netflix series on painkillers about the Sackler family and Purdue Pharmaceutical. I mean, the system is totally rigged for people that have money and power. They just buy these politicians. They bought off the regulators at the FDA to get OxyContin approved, even though they knew it was addictive. They knew it would kill people. They didn't care. And where was the government? You know, so when he goes off about stuff like that, he's right. You know, so people listen to that and go, yeah. And then 3 steps later, you know, the CIA killed my father and my uncle, and, you know, big pharma's doing this, and vaccines are doing that, and, you know, we're awash in toxic chemicals, and frogs are becoming gay, and 3 hours later you're down the rabbit hole, right? So I guess part of the problem with this is what your book is about, is, you know, how do you know what he said, which parts of what he says are true and not true?
You raise a really good point there, because, and I mean, people have to recognize that is a disinformation tactic. Disinformers don't just always make up something. They make up something that capitalizes on an existing fissure or an existing truth, right? They'll pick out something, you know, one little kernel of truth, so that it makes what the other things that they're saying more credible. So it does make it difficult, because this is sometimes in the Russian system called the fire hose of falsehood. You know, they'll say just a million false things, and then what are you supposed to do? Go through and debunk every one of them? But, you know, then if even one of them's true, it makes it sound like, oh, well, maybe the other ones are credible. That's just how trust works. That's how people process information. They are, I mean, we're on the whole, I think, trusting beings. You know, we've evolved I mean, look at the societies we live in. We live in these, you know, enormous cities where we're not killing each other left and right on the street. We really do trust each other and cooperate fairly well if you compare to how it might be. And so when somebody's lying to our face, it's very hard to imagine that they're lying. And you know what? Sometimes they believe it. They believe their own lie, right? They're self-deluded, and that makes it especially hard because they're even better liars. So how do you fight back against something like that? I think the answer is to be careful who you trust. Be aware of other things that somebody has said. To think about critical thinking, to think about being skeptical. What might the agenda be that the person has? I mean, you listen to the whole 3-hour podcast. I mean, how long into that do you have to listen before you figure out this guy's a conspiracy theorist? There's something really wrong with him.
Yeah, it didn't take long, but this is part of my job, so that's why I did it.
You're an expert.
And I also listened to him on, he was on with Barry Weiss. He was on with, I think, Jordan Peterson. In fact, the 2024 campaign may be the campaign of podcasts rather than cable news like 2016 and 2020 were, because they have such massive platforms and you can talk for as long as you like. There's no hard out. There's no almost no commercials. Last month I was at Freedom Fest, which is kind of a conservative, mostly libertarian-leaning conference. Mark Skousen is the director of the owner of it, and he's a good friend. And to my utter astonishment, RFK Jr. shows up, and they're doing a fundraising campaign there at the conference was in Memphis, so the fundraiser was it wasn't even a fundraiser; it was just a dinner. Somebody paid for. None of us paid to go. It was at Elvis's car museum, which was pretty cool. Anyway, I got a kind of a good sense of what the appeal. These were not liberals. These are not Democrats. These are mostly libertarian, maybe disaffected conservatives that whatever, never Trumpers and so on. And they seem to like him a lot because why? Not because I think not because of the conspiracy theories and anti-vaxxer stuff. I think it's never trust big organizations. I don't trust big corporations. I don't trust big government. I don't trust intelligence agencies. They're all corrupt. That appeals to a lot of people, yes. I think. Whether the specifics are true or not, whether, Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, this is secondary, right? He's touching something deeper. Don't trust big organizations.
Well, yes, and trust him. He wants you to trust him. It's hard because when there's somebody, especially with a recognizable name and an instant platform like he has, sometimes people's reaction is, well, no, why would he be lying about that? Or they might think, well, he kind of feels like I feel, he's tapped into something that I already believe maybe. And, so then I'm more receptive to, whatever alleged facts he's sharing about the other organizations. And that can be hard. I mean, is because you're an expert on this, that belief is not just a matter of rationality. It's a matter of feeling. It's a matter of community, of identity, all these other things that go on. And so if you get somebody who's a skilled orator, they can really change people's mind when they shouldn't, when the people should be a little more skeptical. I mean, you run the magazine Skeptic, so you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's just it's hard to have a blanket solution. And I guess my advice to people is simply that if we wake up to the fact that we're in an information war, then it makes you more wary. Then it makes you wonder, is that true or is it propaganda? Or to ask, why does the person want me to believe that? Not just is what they're saying true, but why do they want me to believe it's true? Now, that in and of itself can sound like I've got a conspiracy theory there, except in some cases there's evidence, who's behind them, who's paying the bills, and so read good journalistic sources and dig to the bottom, and listen to good podcasts. By the way.
They make a difference.
The danger, of course, I mean, you put your finger right on the right thing with cable news or with podcasts. That's the danger. It's the amplification of disinformation. The disinformer just saying something doesn't count for much. But once that voice is amplified and given credibility, then it can be quite dangerous.
Yeah. By the way, on Rogan's podcast, they got to talking about climate change. And after spending an hour running down the scientific experts and don't trust the CDC and don't trust big government agencies and scientists and experts and so on, he then pivots and goes, oh, climate change, totally real, totally human caused. Trust the science. The consensus is in. The jury is in. And we're going to go after the big fossil fuel companies and bring them to court and sue them. And it's like, what? You just said don't trust authorities and science. There is no scientific consensus. So, everybody, including RFK Jr., picks his battles, I guess.
No, they're cafeteria skeptics, I always say. People go
That's a good way to put it.
They choose, they go through the buffet line and they choose the thing that they want to believe. And they're very skeptical of the thing they don't want to believe, but they're very gullible of the thing they do want to believe. It's a real problem.
That's one thing that bothers me about RFK Jr., and then I'll get off that topic. But also that, he always says, I don't want to be wrong. Just show me where I'm wrong and I'll change my mind. But he never does. And people constantly show him where he's wrong. Paul Offit's been posting stuff regularly on, here's what he said on Rogan's podcast or whatever. Yeah. And here's the story he told. He cited this study. Here's the study. Here's what it actually says. You're wrong, RFK Jr. Will you publicly state I am wrong? And he never does. He doesn't even respond. That's
what the flat earthers do. I mean, I wrote that earlier book, The Scientific Attitude, making the argument that what's really distinctive about science is that scientists care about evidence and they're willing to change their mind on the basis of new evidence. The problem with science deniers, really the problem with any denier, is not just that they believe the wrong thing, but that when it's pointed out to them that there's evidence against what they believe, they won't change their mind. They won't, and they won't even say in advance what would change their mind. That old Karl Popper question. What evidence, if I had it in my back pocket, could convince you to change your mind? They don't even want to say in advance what that is, just in case you've got it in your back pocket. That's what it really takes, I think, to be a scientific reasoner, to really be good at this, is to be skeptical, but also flexible enough to say, you know what, that evidence is good. Maybe I don't have proof or certainty, because you can't have that in empirical reasoning. But what I do have is warrant. I know that there's more evidence for this hypothesis than the alternative. So guess which one it's more rational to believe? I mean, there's no world in which it's more rational to believe the less credible hypothesis. So why do they do that? Because you hear this from RFK Jr. all the time. He wants proof. He wants certainty. Prove to me that this didn't happen. Right. That's the wrong standard.
Yeah. I don't know if you saw the tweet yesterday from Uri Geller posting a picture of alien bodies in a warehouse. And he said, I can't tell you all where this came from, but until I get permission from the authorities to share with you what I know about this photo. And then viewers pointed out, that's an image from an X-Files episode. And here's the episode. And you can see Scully and Mulder in the warehouse with the same alien bodies. So of course everybody points this out to him within an hour, and he doesn't respond. He doesn't oh my God, I was taken in and I got fooled. I'm so sorry. Nothing.
No,
it's just so dishonest.
Because it'll go away.
That's true. Yes, right. Within a day or two, no one will even remember that it happened. Yeah. Okay, back to the. One other thing on the truth default theory. So I'm a little conflicted about this. I'm not sure what I think about this. I've talked to Hugo Mercier on this podcast where he says, people actually do not default to truth. They're not suckers. They don't just believe everything they say. In fact, it's hard for advertisers to get people to buy their products. It's hard for candidates to get people to switch their vote to their campaign because people are naturally skeptical. But then I have, like I just had Christopher Simmons on with his book. What is it? Nobody's Fool, I think it is. No, it's a different title. In any case, he's the gorilla, the gorilla video guy, along with it was Christopher Chabris. Yeah, no, sorry, Christopher Chabris I had on the show. Daniel Simmons is his co-author of the book. In any case, they feel that people do, like you just said, default to truth. They tend, because who has time to fact check everything? We have to trust people. So I'm not sure what to think about that. Are we suckers and gullible by nature? Are we naturally skeptical and it's hard to get people to fall for cults and schemes and scams and frauds? Part of the problem is we don't know how many times the fraudster tried this particular X fraud. before they were successful. We don't know about the failures, the survivor bias, right? We hear about the people that join Jonestown or Scientology, right, or any of these, the Waco group and so on. But how many people left, the first day, or how many people take the Scientology personality test and go, this is bullshit, and they just walk away? Or right, the NXIVM cult. How many women took those self-help empowerment seminars about how to be successful in business, and they never had sex with Keith Raniere? They never had brands. They never gave them money. They just walked away. And this is part of the problem. We don't know because no one keeps track of that data.
And I mean, the work that Mercier and Sperber are doing on rationality, both the book and the article, so what I think you're talking about, is very fascinating work. I mean, and it really plugs a hole in just your intuition about how could we have evolved as a species to be that gullible. I mean, we must have some ability. We must have some skeptical ability to, just naturally to be able to fight back against something like this. But I don't, what the thing I've never understood about their work is, and maybe you can help me to understand this to the extent that I can, how do you account for all of those times when there are mass delusions, when people get suckered, all the people that believe in flat earth or against evolution or that the vaccines are fake, all of these, the followers of Uri Geller, all of these problems. I mean, I'm friends with Andy Norman, and he's got this book, Mental Immunity. And I think he's got a very interesting point in that book, which is that we have a mental immune system. We have an ability to fight off bad ideas, and it works pretty well. But in an infodemic, in an environment that's really the weaponization of information, not just sitting around the campfire trying to figure out who's a liar, but where we've got social media and these skilled liars coming at us over cable news, our mental immune system isn't equipped to handle that. And so one thing Andy argues for in his book is we need to beef up our own immune system. We can do it. I mean, yes, we have a mental immune system, but that doesn't mean there's not something that we can do to help it, kind of on analogy with your biological immune system. You want to keep yourself healthy so your immune system works well. So, I mean, there are things we can do to make ourselves more skeptical. I guess here's my problem with the Mercier and Sperber hypothesis. It almost sounds like they're saying, don't worry, it's no big deal. Post-truth is not real. Everything is really fine. It's all, things turn out best in the end. And, we'll get through this. There'll be some bumps in the road, but we'll be all right. Except that sometimes we're not. I mean, sometimes there are horrible things that happen as a result of mass delusion, or even just one person in power who's deluded, who has enough power to affect everyone else. I'm thinking here of Mbeke in South Africa, who said, AZT is a Western plot. You can cure HIV/AIDS. He wasn't even sure that HIV caused AIDS. You can cure this through lemon juice, garlic, and beetroot. Well, 300,000 people died in South Africa as a result of that. That was because one guy in power was a science denier. So it really is, I think, more dangerous than they say. The claim that I'm making in my own work, because I've got a whole book on post-truth, is not that post-truth, that truth doesn't matter, or that, we're past that. It's that truth is under assault. And I think that, even if Mercier and Sperber are right, that we do have the ability to be skeptical. That's like sending somebody who's, got a shotgun in their closet out to war. It's a very different thing when you're in war. It's an information war, which is what I think we're in now, is a very different kind of a thing.
Yeah, a couple thoughts on that. I think there's elements of truth to all these different theories about rationality and truth default. It's very context dependent. It's also socially and politically context dependent. Hitler being the the type specimen there, and Mercier talks about this in his book, Not Born Yesterday.
Mhm.
How did this happen? And part of the reason is it's slow enough that by the time he went to the real dark side, passing all the anti-Jewish legislation and so on, it was too late for dissenters to do anything. The free press there was no free press. They took over the press. And they set up those concentration camps. Most people know about the big camps, but there was thousands of these little camps where they would just send off anyone who was dissenting, exactly like Putin does. Putin's a little more blatant about just killing them, but locking them up. So if you see your neighbors being hauled off and you don't see them again, you're just going to keep your mouth shut. So you can't. By then it's too late. And same thing with Putin. Why doesn't somebody in his own administration or whatever in Russia stop him? They can't. That's the belling the cat problem. The mice all think, well, we should put a little bell on the cat so we can hear him coming. All right, who's going to bell the cat? Well, not me. You go bell him, because whoever does it's going to probably get eaten, right? So, no one wants to do it, except Navalny, who you talked about, who is he still alive? I think he's still in prison.
He
right?
is. He's still in prison, and yeah.
But the average person could look at that and go, well, I got a family. I'm just trying to just live my life. I don't want to do that. I could hardly blame him, And so I think that's what carries it out. And so, again, back to where we began, my sense, maybe I'm naive, but that even if Trump won and got another 4 years, it's unlikely he could end the media, press, shut down the New York Times through legal measures or whatever. This just is not going to happen here. I don't see how it could happen here. And even if he said, I don't want to leave after 4 years, you've served your 2 terms, that's what the Constitution says, you have to leave. Well, I'm not going to leave, and instead I'm going to do X. What could he do? I mean, the Supreme Court's already stood up to him many times. All those courts stood up to him on the election lawsuits he brought, the 2020 election lawsuits he brought, and he failed in all of them. So the courts, they do stand up to him. I just don't see the pathway where this could end the republic. That's what I'm saying.
Let me try to convince you.
Okay.
Because who has stood up to him so far in a way that stopped him? I mean, you talk about the belling the cat problem. In a second Trump administration, who's going to bell that cat? Who's going to stand up to him? Who's really going to be able to do it? You're presuming that there's going to be enough effective resistance out there such that, after everything that he's done and he still wins, that there would be enough resistance left to stop him.
Well, Mike Pence stood up to him.
Yeah, he did. He did. I mean, there are always, and looking back in that history, I feel somewhat lucky. I mean, if the couple of cops had been standing in a different hallway, if Mike Pence had been just a tiny bit different than he was, would it have turned out quite differently? So, I'm part of this is because I'm a belt and suspenders guy. I don't want to leave it to, it's probably going to work out. I think that Trump has done enough damage. And I also take the work of Tim Snyder very seriously in On Tyranny and things that he's done since, where, he makes the argument that we've seen this before. I mean, during the 2016 election, he was over in Eastern Europe, watching what was happening in Hungary, watching what was happening in Turkey, and thinking, oh my God, this is happening back home too. So it's not as if there's no pathway that, it's not as if we haven't seen this happen. That is, somebody who starts out like Trump eventually does effectively end democracy. Is Hungary actually a democracy anymore? Is Turkey? I mean, they just had an election. But there's this gray area, I think. People call it different things. I've heard it called electoral dictatorship. There's a nicer word for it than that, where you've got a society that still has representatives. They still have elections. The people still have a press. But the game is so rigged that who's going to win the election. Who's going to go to prison. That to me, I mean, we're getting dangerously close to that line. There was a piece by Evan Osnos in, I think it was in the New Yorker, where he talked about, because he was talking about China at the time, and I wish I could remember the name of the piece, but it was a brilliant piece and very vivid, where he talks about, look, the thing is, it's just like walking into a room and your eyes begin to adjust and you don't realize how dark it's getting because your eyes are adjusting the whole time. And that's what I'm afraid is happening. It's not that Trump could end democracy overnight. It's that the twilight keeps getting darker and darker. And I don't know at what point we get to the point where nobody can stop him anymore, where we kind of pass that point, like we did with North Korea and the bomb. Oh, we can stop them. We can stop them. Yeah, we're not going to let them get there. And then one day, they're a nuclear power.
Yeah. Well, that's a slightly different scenario dealing with a foreign country. We can only do so much. I'm encouraged by Attorney General Bill Barr's standing up to Trump. I mean, he was a lifelong Republican, Trump appointee, voted for Trump. And so forth. And, we looked into the whole election fraud theories, and there was no evidence for it. All those courts, again, as I said, and Trump even tried to take it to the Supreme Court. And his own 3 appointees that he made, including Amy Coney Barrett, said, no, we're not taking this because there's nothing to it. So, to me, that's encouraging. I just don't see how he could.
I hope you're right.
Get past that.
I hope you're right. It feels a little risky to me. That is, let me put it this way. The things that I'm advocating in my book that the ordinary citizen can do to fight back against disinformation don't hurt. I mean, if it's unnecessary, it's kind of like, taking your vitamin C, even if you weren't going to get a cold anyway. It's all right. It's still, it can't hurt. So, the things that I'm arguing for about people being awake to the idea that there's foreign disinformation coming in, or, around some of these issues. Being more aware of what their representatives in Congress are responding to, issues about regulation of social media and about censorship and fighting disinformation. People should have a voice on this. The ordinary citizen should have a voice, and not just let the big tech companies have a voice on this, I think.
Yeah, it's a curious thing. I've just been amazed that Trump still has so much support. I guess he called it in 2015 when he said I could shoot somebody on Broadway and it wouldn't affect my ratings. He's right. Yeah. And the fourth conviction we had yesterday, number 4 in Georgia. I mean, this, again, his fundraising goes up, his numbers go up. And I've just been astonished by how the Republican Party, conservatives, we're the party of principle and law and order and values and morals. And, maybe it's back to where we were talking about truth default or whatever, maybe they just can't do anything about it. It's like, why did they let Trump get the nomination back in 2016? And so, well, they can't, there is no they. They just, nobody could stop it. It's just how it works in our system. There's no top-down decisions like that. Although, back in when Bernie was pushing Hillary, it did look like the Democratic Party was nudging him out, essentially saying, we think Hillary is our candidate and we're going to rig it against Bernie. That did seem a little top-down.
The other way, I was reading a study last night about motivated reasoning. And, just because I was thinking about the response from Ted Cruz and, all these other people who were defending Trump, who will privately say they know he did something wrong, but they're publicly defending him. And, why would they do that? And this study was by David Redlosk, who's a political scientist, and he published this study in 2010. And he did an experiment where he ran a fake primary political campaign with 3 candidates, totally made up biographies, et cetera, et cetera. And he had the experimental subjects, in the convention hall, and the kind of artificial timeline. Who do you like? Who are you going to support? Et cetera, et cetera. And then he would control the information flow, and at a certain point, he would put in negative information, say about one of the candidates, and then measure how that altered support. he found something very interesting. A little bit of negative information increased support. These were amongst partisans, right? They had already committed, and he let a little bit of time pass. Say they were already a little bit into the campaign. But then, and this is the part that gives me hope, what he found is that as the negative information continued, eventually the support all vanished. So it's kind of like a glacier melting. You can't see it. It's not happening. They say it's melting. It's really not. And then all of a sudden it happens, and it happens completely. So the point of the article was, do partisans ever reach a tipping point? And they do. Even partisans will reach a tipping point where if the information is bad information and it's presented to them, right between the eyes over and over and over again, they will eventually listen to it, especially in an interactive environment like that, where they're judging their beliefs relative to what their friends believe. And, you're starting to see some of that support erode for Trump amongst the people who are running against him, amongst Pence, Chris Christie, etc. But I think the glacier is starting to melt on the inside, and that might happen with Trump's supporters too. I kind of felt that yesterday, which is why I read the Redlosk study, because it just seemed like it fit. It just seemed like it fit so well with what's happening. Why is his support going up? Well, that's what you would predict based on Redlosk's model. But then as the bad information continues to flow, it will just, the ice will fall off into the ocean and the glacier will be no more. Now, maybe that's motivated reasoning on my part. I'm wishing that happens. I'm hoping that happens.
Yeah.
But reading the Redlosk study really helped me to understand there's a way to measure this. This is not just something that we've never seen before. Empirical social scientists have been looking at these kind of problems and modeled it.
Yeah, Barry Weiss had Chris Christie on her podcast, and he was ranting about what a despicable human being Trump is, and then she plays for him his endorsements of Trump in 2016. It's really funny.
That's mean.
And he's like, but to his credit, he goes, "Well, I was wrong. I bought into the whole bullshit, and I was wrong." It's like, okay, all right, that's fair enough. We can all be wrong.
That gives other people permission to say they were wrong too, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. But he has, next to no chance at this point, in any case. No, none of them seem to. But that could all change. We're still a ways out.
But Biden was at 3% at one point back in the primary in the old days. Right. I mean, I wouldn't count Chris Christie out. If anybody can take down Trump, I think it's another, loud, Fighter. Big guy who knows how to, push people around.
I know Trump must be concerned about Chris Christie because he was making fun of his eating habits and his weight.
Oh my goodness. like he can't push that back against him, right?
Right.
Yeah.
That's too funny. But again, back to, you talk about identity in your book as being so important, particularly to voters. It's like when the tapes came out of Tucker Carlson and what he really thought about Trump. Mm-hmm. Which was the exact opposite of what he was saying on Fox News. And it no one seems to care. It's like, well, you mean he was lying to us? Yeah, he was lying to you. Well, okay, I don't care. Like, what?
Again, this, in Russia, there are people, even when they had an independent media, but before the attack on Ukraine, there was some independent media in Russia. And I wish I remember the exact statistic, but a shocking percentage of people watch state TV by choice. It's propaganda, but they watch it by choice because it tells them what they want to hear. So there's that moment when maybe what is that dividing line? When you know it's a lie, but it's what you want to believe, so you continue to watch it. I read a book one time by Robert Trivers, the great evolutionary biologist, called The Folly of Fools.
Yeah,
he made such a compelling case in that book that about self-delusion. And that, talk about, evolution, going back to the Mercier and Speer-Bear idea. Maybe that's it. Maybe we evolved to believe our own bullshit because it makes us a more effective liar, right? That's the real danger. I mean, that's the real insight into human nature, the ability to want to believe something so much that you convince yourself, and then you go out and you convince other people. So you know that book. That's just a brilliant book.
I do think that most probably cult leaders probably come to believe the bullshit they're saying. Maybe they don't start off like that. Like psychics who they're just having fun, goofing around, doing astrological readings or palm readings or whatever. And then they get enough feedback from their clients, their marks, like, wow, that was so right. I can't believe you got that. And then they start thinking, maybe I really am good at this. And then they get better at it because they really believe it. And then you get a positive feedback loop, and pretty soon the cult leader comes to believe he really is God or whoever. I think that's possible.
I think that does happen. I mean, what did Larry Speaks, Reagan's old spokesman, say? If you tell the same story 3 times, it's true, right? I mean, it just doesn't take that much feedback to get somebody to think, yeah, that's probably right. Look at Karl Rove. Karl Rove, the spinmeister. And yet on the night when, which election was it now? I guess it was the Obama election. He just, he on air had a meltdown because he couldn't believe that Fox News was calling the election for Obama. And it was just, I guess this was, I guess it was 2012. I guess it was the one against, not against McKinney, it was the one against, I don't remember the details. But he had, Rove was drinking the Kool-Aid. I mean, he had convinced himself that this was possible, even when he should have known that it wasn't.
Right. Yeah. Well, okay. So we've been pounding on Republicans and conservatives for lying. But so let me make a few comments about liberal lies that bother me. Like GMOs are bad for health, bad for the environment. So not true. Nuclear power is, we're going to end up with another Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island. So not true. And climate change, although it's real and human cause, is going to lead to the extinction of the human species. Not true. And so on. These are the things that, and I'm just kind of giving you some insight on what another motive of conservatives or Trump supporters or whatever. They hear enough of this and they go, I can see with my own 2 eyes that men cannot be women. Women don't have penises. This is just bullshit. These people are lying. And therefore, I'm going to go with Trump or whoever, even though I know he's full of bullshit, but it's not as bad as the bullshit the libtards are feeding us. Something like that. Just follow a Chris Rufo, that, the whole anti-racism, critical race theory, all that stuff that he's pushing back against. But in a lot of those, the things that are being told by the critical race theory people are lies. They're not true. That, for example, that police killings of blacks are in the thousands or tens of thousands. It's not true. It's less than 100 a year and so on. They're lying. And this is one of the animated motivations, I think, of people on the right. They hear enough of that and they go, that is just wrong.
I'm a science guy. Some of the things that you're talking about are instances in which people have political or normative beliefs, and they're looking for a way for science to validate the political views that they have. I did a whole chapter on GMOs, as you know, in my book, How to Talk to a Science Denier. And so, I mean, it is attractive, and it happens on both the left and the right. The best example that I can think of was vaccines before COVID. I mean, you had people on the left and on the right who were anti-vaxxers, who were believing that the MMR vaccine could cause autism. Some of them because, the people on the left, because they didn't like big corporations, because they didn't like big pharma, and on the right, because they didn't like big corporations. I got that backwards, but you see my point. The problem is kind of arguing over which side science is on. And there's a problem here, which is that if it's the way that you describe it, then what people are really doing, do you think it's that they're looking at the science and they want to defend, what the science says, and so so they're rejecting the normative statements that people are making? Or is it that they already know what their political views are, and so they're cherry picking something out? Because, you'd have to find consistency, wouldn't you? Right? You'd have to find somebody who was not, say, a climate denier, on the other end of the equation, because, they couldn't use the same type of reasoning to defend their idea that climate denial was okay when they were rejecting, that point about GMOs. So, when I say I'm a science guy, what I mean here is that, I don't think that some of the things that you mentioned are things where there is a scientific consensus. I don't think that, we've got a perfect answer on it. And to the extent that people are arguing on the left or the right, yes, absolutely, science has, settled this issue and we're done with it, then I think that's a mistake. We can get more into the weeds on some of the specific issues that you're talking about. I'm trying to kind of do a view from 30,000 feet here on the fact that, you mentioned about 5 different things where it seems to me that they're all kind of a piece. There where people want something to be true so much that they're willing to say that science backs them up 100% and that there's no argument on the other side. Now, I have to be careful there, because on the other side, somebody could say, well, but isn't that exactly what you're saying about climate change, right? So, why aren't you allowing the folks who are genuine scientists, who are, gadflies, who are questioning the consensus on climate change, to have their voice? It matters what the weight of the scientific evidence is. So we can get into the weeds on any one of those that you want, but that's just kind of my view from 30,000 feet.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. And people get confused between facts and values. They put a moral element over the whole thing and think, well, the science has to come out a certain way, because if it doesn't, then people of color, minorities will be badly treated. Like the race and IQ issue that's been around forever. Mm-hmm. Group differences in IQ, right. Racial group differences in IQ. This is a taboo subject for obvious reasons. Right. And but the sense is, if the science has to come out a certain way, or else it's going to justify discrimination against people of color. Well, the science is going to be whatever it is. You can't change that. And don't confuse the two. I mean, people should not discriminate against people of color, or trans, or anybody for any reason. And we already have these constitutional protections that protect people's rights. Trans rights are human rights, absolutely. You shouldn't be fired for being trans or whatever. But that's a separate question from, are there group differences in IQ scores, or can a woman actually become a man and vice versa? These are scientific questions that we have to leave open. But most people, it's too hard to keep those separate. They want to kind of overlap them, and then they get confused, and they want the science to come out a certain way. And I think that's the problem. I wanted to ask you about, I was just finishing reading, I'll give you another book I just finished this week called, I don't know if you've seen it, Foolproof.
Yes.
Sander van der Linden,
yep,
really interesting.
I know him.
Oh, you do? Okay, I don't know him, but I like the book a lot. So there, he's talking about, what's the subtitle here? Why misinformation infects our minds and how to build immunity. Yeah, so along that kind of viral analog, which I like a lot. But there, there's some discussions about to what extent fake news, alternative facts, social media actually did change, say, the 2016 election. Mm-hmm. And he's citing studies on this, and you can give me your opinion on those as well, that it really didn't have that much of effect, that most voters are just voting their party. It doesn't matter who the candidate is. And maybe this explains Trump as well, right? I can't vote for Hillary, so I don't like Trump, but I can't vote for Hillary, so. And maybe most voters just follow the party line. It doesn't really matter. And therefore, it doesn't matter how much fake news is poured out on Facebook. Most people are not going to change their votes anyway. What's the latest research on that, and what are your thoughts on that problem?
Sander's written a a brilliant book. I'm a little. I mean, full disclosure, I'm a friend of his, but I mean, I think that the point that he's making is that there is a way to fight back against misinformation that some people have been overlooking, which is that we can pre-bunk, not just debunk. We don't just have to wait until somebody has already heard the misinformation and then try to disabuse them of the false thing that they believe. We can try to inoculate them in advance, by preparing them, for the fact that maybe they're going to hear a conspiracy theory, or that the person who's trying to convince them, has written something else that's not credible, right? So I think that's the the point of the book, that there is kind of almost, he argues that there this kind of the DNA of misinformation, and once you can identify it, then you can fight back against it. Now, I haven't exactly answered your question because I forget precisely what the question was.
Oh, well, to what extent is social media really a problem for our
right.
political system?
Right.
Yeah.
Now these data are a little bit old, but I remember Mark Zuckerberg saying at one point that it was crazy to think that any of the Russian propaganda on Facebook could have had an effect on the election, kind of defying people to show that it had any sort of an effect. And yet later admitted that 126 million people saw those posts. So, and how do you measure how much of an effect, that would have had? I mean, it's difficult to know. It's difficult to know precisely how to measure that. But one worries just over the volume of the onslaught there. If 126 million people see something, it's going to affect a certain fraction of them. Is that fraction enough to throw an election? I don't know. But I do think we have to take social media seriously. I do think, just like we have to take partisan media seriously, because the folks who are saying that, well, this isn't really a problem, there isn't really that much that we need to worry about, I think that they're putting the burden of proof in the wrong place. I think they've got this idea that, unless you can show that, some particular disinformation message is going to have some deleterious effect, you've got to let it out there in the information sphere, that, this is just what it means to live in a free society. This is what's bothered me so much about the claim, I think the bogus claim, that any fight against disinformation is just censorship, because the social media companies are not. I mean, they're amplifying the message. That's the problem, right? It's not whether they've come up with a message, it's that they're amplifying the message. And Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act protects them, in two different ways. People forget that there are two parts of it, right? It protects them from, if something slips through, some terrible thing, and, they can't get sued because they missed something. But it also protects them if they want to take something down that they find offensive. So they could do more to fight against disinformation. It's just not in their wheelhouse. I mean, it's not in their interest to do it. So that's why they don't do more of it. So, I mean, it's hard to, the argument that we just need to let everybody have a voice and truth will rise to the top. I don't think that works. Yeah.
I like that idea, but I agree it probably doesn't work. But you say these companies aren't doing much. Didn't you say Zuckerberg, Facebook has a team of 40,000 people?
Yes.
That are, I mean,
not enough.
That's massive. Well, not enough. Imagine the payroll for that. My God.
Let me give you a thought experiment. I know you've seen because I've written about this before, but let me just do this out in public. I ask this question when I give a paper in a big crowd. How many of you have ever seen porn on Facebook? And nobody's hand ever goes up. Now, it's because Facebook scrubs for that. They scrub for porn. They scrub for beheadings. They scrub for terrorism. You don't see that on Facebook because they know that if that leaked out, it would be the end of their business. So I mean, however many people, it's got to be the worst job at Facebook, but they don't just rely on their algorithms. They have a human team scrubbing that stuff out. So they can't tell me that disinformation about the vaccines or disinformation about the 2020 election was too overwhelming for them. They didn't want to do it. They didn't want to do more than they did.
But is this porn? It's pretty easy to identify, relatively speaking, I guess, on pictures versus, I don't know, Robert Malone says that vaccines cause myocarditis, or maybe. I mean, how would you know if that's the right thing or not? Or he suggests it's possible. I'm just asking.
You're saying they'd have to fact check every claim before they pull.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, let me turn the telescope around. Because I'll talk about an instance in which they did know and did nothing. In 2019, the Center for Countering Digital Hate found that 65% of the anti-vax propaganda on Twitter was due to 12 people, one of whom was RFK Jr.
Mm-hmm.
The night before Elon Musk took over Twitter, I was on vacation. But I said, give me the computer, I gotta check this because it's going to change as of tomorrow. I want to know before he's even got his hands on it. How many of those people are still on Twitter? 8 of them were still on Twitter. So, that's 3 years. They had 3 years to deplatform the disinformation dozen, and they didn't. This was before Elon Musk. So, I mean, I think that I think a credible case can be made that the social media companies could do more if they had the incentive to do more, but they don't, so they don't.
And is that a failure of the regulatory state? Again, regulatory capture. I mean, you can't blame Zuckerberg. It's literally his job to make as much money and get the Facebook stock to go up, which means more eyeballs on the website so they can sell more ads and so on and so forth. That's how capitalism works. That's his job.
I'm not in favor of Congress being this super fact-checking board. I don't think that's going to work. I think that they keep having hearings and they keep doing nothing. And I'm not sure that if I could have them do something, I'm not sure the thing I'd want them to do is to be the super fact checker, right up in Twitter and Facebook's business. What I would like to see is a proposal that cognitive scientist Stephen Lewandowski made, which is that there's more transparency around their algorithms, that you could find a way to shield user data. You could find a way so that, you could protect people's privacy, but have, say, a review board of cognitive scientists, data scientists, other experts who could look at the algorithms, which are right now black boxes, to anybody outside the companies, and to see whether they were likely to cause harm. I mean, right now, we find out they cause harm only after it's done, when a whistleblower comes forward. But these can be dangerous things. And, might Congress require there to be a, nonpartisan, hand-chosen regulatory board, which looked at the regulatory board's the wrong word, transparency board, whatever you want to call it. People who looked at the algorithms to identify trouble spots before they happened. That's something that I think that even free speech advocates, I think, could get behind that, because it's not shutting down the message. It's not regulating what they can and can't say. It's saying that we need another set of eyes who maybe don't have an interest in, the money that they're making, identifying whether the messages that they're letting through, some of which are disinformation, are causing public harm.
Yeah, you mentioned, I forget what it was, like how many millions of hours or videos are posted every hour, day, or whatever.
I forget the exact number. It's shocking how much.
It is shocking. I mean, if you think about, Section 230 and so on, if the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal publishes an op-ed that libels you and causes you to get fired from your job and you lose your income, you could sue them, and you should, and so forth. They should be held accountable. but maybe they get 100 submissions a day and they publish 2 or 3 of them, and the ones they publish, they fact check carefully and the lawyers go through them or whatever. That's easy. But if you have 10,000 hours a day or whatever it is of videos,
Right.
how could you possibly monitor that? Just by chance, a couple of weekends ago, I was at a tennis clinic here in Santa Barbara. The lunch break, one of the other tennis players, this woman, works for Google. I go, well, what do you do? I work for Google. Oh, cool. You work for Google. What do you do? Oh, I'm in charge of their safety and security of our customers for YouTube. I went, you're one of those. Oh my God. So I got a question for you. I said, I have a podcast. I had Helen Joyce on the podcast talking about trans issues, and it was fine. Got good ratings. No one touched it. No flags or anything like that. Jordan Peterson has her on his podcast, pretty much the same conversation, and it gets flagged and then taken down by YouTube. Why? She goes, I don't even know who that is. She's like, there's like 10,000
Jordan Peterson
employees. Yeah, well, she knew Jordan Peterson. She just didn't know Helen Joyce or what this issue was about. She goes, we have tens of thousands of employees that this is all they do, and we have algorithms that flag it, and then somebody's going to watch it. Sometimes that made me think, maybe there is nobody calling the shots. Conservatives think that YouTube is targeting their content, like PragerU videos or something. I'm not sure there's any top-down thing going on. I think that it's just so massively complex. And you got these algorithms, scraping through the internet, and then you have tens of thousands of people around the world who sit there and watch the podcast or the videos, and then they have to make a decision. And I'm not sure there's anybody who actually understands how the whole system works, such that somebody in Congress can go, okay, here's what we're going to have you do from now on. It just seems like such a massively hard problem to solve.
It is a very hard problem to solve, which is one reason that I think that we should not just leave it up to the social media companies to solve it themselves. I mean, it seems to me that, I was watching some coverage a few months back where, AI all of a sudden, scared the hell out of everybody all at once. And even that guy, what was his name? Hinton, who quit Google just so he could say, this is the apocalypse, this is an extinction level event. But I had some hope because I saw, and I forget the name of the fellow, but he was one of the executives at one of the AI companies. I think maybe even the one at, OpenAI, who said, regulate us, sit down with us, help us figure this out. We don't want to fulfill these dire predictions. We want to do the right thing. And so I think there's some room there. I think there really is some room for people of goodwill to sit down together and try to figure out how to do this. It's going to require that the social media companies are not, the only people who have access to their algorithms. And you make a good point. Free enterprise system, they're out there to make money. Well, there are a lot of companies that are out there to make money. We do have regulations. We don't allow them to do certain things that would lead to public harm.
Yeah, just like athletes want rules and they want officials to make it fair. Most of them don't want to cheat.
Yeah.
But the problem is if the officials or the sanctioning bodies are not enforcing the rules, then you have to cheat, because if you think somebody else is cheating, and like the doping problem in sports that I've written about. Yeah. So, okay. So let's talk about what we can do about all this. You have a list of 8 things we could do. First, that is to say, in context, what happens if you hear bullshit or if you hear something and you don't know if it's true or not, right? So, or, how all of us can fight back against disinformation. First, confront the liars. This is a lesson learned from how I'm reading from your book.
Okay.
How to effectively combat science deniers. If you just let the liar have the microphone, things will only get worse and new recruits will come forward. Okay, so what's the average person supposed to do? Like write an op-ed to the local newspaper or post on Twitter or Facebook or?
Well, one goal of disinformation is to make people feel helpless, to make people feel, it shares false information. It polarizes us around factual issues. And then, when you hear enough of it, maybe you just kind of decide, I can't even tell what's true. Maybe there is no such thing as truth. I'm just going to give up. And in fact, maybe I'm just going to, I'm enough of a partisan that I'm just going to believe what the other people on my team tell me that I should believe, which is, I think, a mistake, to go that way. So writing an op-ed, sure. But I have to say, I think that the main thing that we can do to fight against disinformation is to be aware of the problem, just to be, to understand the environment that you're in. Think of those couple of days leading right up to the pandemic. Did we really know what was coming? Did we know what the risk was? I was in Seattle in early March of 2020, at the AAAS meeting in Seattle, and Bill Gates was giving a speech, and talking about I don't remember what he was talking about, but it was something advocacy for science, and this was not that many days before the COVID. COVID was already around, but it was still in China, and we all had a false sense of security. We were all in that room unmasked. And when I went to the airport to fly home after that meeting, I kept seeing people, coming in on overseas flights wearing masks, thinking, wow, I guess it's bad over there. Not realizing what was going to happen in, 10 or 12 days. I'm not 100% sure what the timeline was. But my point is, we were already under assault from, COVID, and we just didn't realize it at the time. And I feel like the same thing is happening now with information. So, are there measures equivalent to wearing a mask or getting your vaccine for fighting against disinformation? I think there are, and I try to outline them in the book. But awareness is one of them. That's I think the main one.
Yeah, but on that issue, masks, let's use that one. That first, again, this is why the right doesn't trust science institutions, right? Oh, don't wear a mask. Don't worry about masks, Anthony Fauci says. Oh, no, never mind. To change my mind, we're going to wear masks. And now it looks like, unless you have an N95 with a really tight seal, the mask did not work to stop the spread. This is what everybody is saying now. It's like, all right, so, did they lie? Or is it just they just didn't know? How could they not know that about masks and airborne viruses like that? Either the masks work or they don't. Yes. And apparently they don't, unless you really consistently wear the N95 mask, which most people were just wearing a cloth mask, which does nothing other than socially see. So again, people on the right go, you know what? This is just bullshit. They're lying to us.
It is a real problem, because once you lie, trust is gone. And as I said, the distinctive thing about science is the ability to change your mind over time. But if the public doesn't see it that way, if they hear a scientist say, no, we're 100% certain this is true, and then you change your mind, it doesn't look like you changed your mind. It looks like you lied. The mask issue is a super important one, because I remember when this happened. And my wife's a physician, and I remember saying, so she was right tip of the spear, there every day, and they were having shortages of N95 masks. And I always wondered if one reason why Fauci came down as hard as he was about how the public didn't need to wear masks was because they were saving the N95 masks for the physicians. Now, look, I'm all in favor of saving those N95 masks for the physicians, because they're the ones who really needed it. But the way to message that was not to say masks don't work, or in casual conversation, it wouldn't make a difference, etc. Because I think that was a lie. I think that look, if masks didn't work, why were they saving them for the physicians? But now their point would be, well, because they're the ones who are at greatest exposure. Then say that. Then say, look, it couldn't hurt to wear a mask. And if you want to be, the safest you can possibly be, you should wear a mask. Precautionary principle, wear a mask. But right now we have a shortage of N95 masks. And the people who are really at greatest risk are the healthcare workers. So don't wear an N95 mask out in public. It's wrong. You're wasting a precious resource. Let's leave those for the physicians. If you want to do something to be safe, wear a homemade mask. I think that would have been a better way to message it. And so, it's not wrong to come to the conclusion that they were kind of lying at that time. And they could say it's a virtuous lie because they were lying to save the masks for the healthcare workers. But the wrong conclusion to draw from that is, well, so scientists are lying about everything. So we can't believe anything that they're saying about vaccines or anything. And I do place some of that blame at the feet of the folks in public health, because once trust is gone, you can't get it back.
Yeah. Well, and the idea that vaccines will stop the spread of COVID. Well, no, that's also not true. I mean, the only argument I heard that made sense was that if you get vaccinated, your symptoms of COVID-19 will be attenuated somewhat. Mm-hmm. Therefore, maybe you will cough less or sneeze less or whatever, and that will maybe slightly slow the spread or decrease the probabilities of you giving it to somebody else.
People will be sick, and not
but it's not going to stop the spread.
No.
Again, you hear this on the right. Again, they lied about the vaccine, right? And so on, and this is how it goes. And it's like, damn. Or closing the schools, shutting down the economy. This now looks like a terrible idea. School children are now 2 years behind reading and math and so on. And, it's not clear to me that it was just a precautionary principle. They just didn't know, say, March, April of 2020, when that closure started, that they knew that they didn't need to do that, but they did it anyway. Why?
Why would they? Though?
Why would they?
Why would they?
I'll give you the far right conspiracy theory. To control the population, to get us, if they can get us to wear masks and stay home and close the schools, they can do even more. Whoever the they is, that's the far right conspiracy theory. To me, kind of the giving the benefit of the doubt to people, politicians. If I was the mayor or governor or president, and you stick a mic in my face and go, "What do we do?" and you go, "Well, let's just carry on business as usual," and it turns out that COVID is going to be like Ebola or HIV, and it kills everybody, or 100 million people are going to die or something like that, and that's on you. So I'd rather say, well, let's close the schools just in case. But it seems to me that by, say, the summer of 2020 or fall of 2020, certainly by early 2021, they knew that probably children are not going to be affected like older people or people with pre-medical conditions and obesity and so on, and the children just don't have that problem. So let's reopen the schools. I think we were very slow to do that. And I'm not sure why that is, a bureaucratic mess or paperwork, I don't know what.
Well, I don't know the answer to that either. I mean, one is the teachers union, right? The teachers don't want to get sick. They don't want to die for their job. I mean, the physicians and the nurses and the ambulance drivers, they know what they're getting in for every day when they go to work. It's maybe different for the teachers. I mean, it's somewhat easy after the fact to wonder, and I certainly don't buy into the nefarious motive about the control the population. You don't either, but they're not going to get it exactly right. They didn't know everything at the time, and I think that the appropriate response to that is humility. The appropriate response is to say, we're not sure that this is the right thing, but here's what the data shows so far, and so this is what we're going to try. And I remember at the time asking questions because I was just getting over a serious illness, and I didn't want to get COVID. I mean, that could have been it for me. And I remember asking my wife questions about viral load. Could this be like for other illnesses, one where the different people had different amounts of the virus in them. And, with this one thing that you said that, Michael, that maybe the mask wouldn't stop it dead, but maybe they would, decrease the spread simply because, the question of viral load. Well, they hadn't measured that at the time, but again, precautionary principle. I thought, well, I'm going to wear a mask. I didn't wear an N95 mask, but I wanted, to wear the mask. And it was, it was such a clash, wasn't it? I mean, we talked before about the clash on the, the science versus the values, because people don't want to be told what to do. And I think that that's some of where it came from with the anti-maskers and the anti-vaxxers. They simply did not want to be told what to do. It's not that they doubted the science. They were ticked off that somebody was telling them whether their kid could go to school, what was the appropriate risk for them to take. The problem is that it was in a society in which other people have interests and other people have values, not unlike the stuff that we were talking about earlier. I mean, everybody has the right, I believe, to live according to the gender identity that they wish to express. Nobody that is, I think nobody should be able to take that away from them. Whether that is embedded in a particular scientific question is a different question. But as a normative question, as a political question, I believe that's not really a question at all. But what happened with COVID is there was this kind of perfect storm in this clash between, I think a lot of the clash was a clash over values, and people pulled the science into it. People have values disputes, and they're looking for an ally, and so they pull the science into it. And so some people would say, well, the science isn't perfect, on the question of COVID. Well, it wasn't. But that doesn't mean that it's safer not to wear a mask. It maybe means that they could say, well, I'm willing to take the risk. But I remember some of the BS at the time of people saying, well, but if you're wearing a mask, you're rebreathing into the mask and it's going to make you sicker. That's ridiculous. So, the problem is that I think sometimes we get into these values disputes and then try to pull science in to save us. And that's when I say I'm a science guy. I want to protect science from the ideology, no matter what the ideology is, political, religious. I think that science is good the way it is, in that it is skeptical but open-minded enough to change their mind on the basis of evidence, but it always has to be on the basis of evidence. So I do have some criticisms of the way that scientists handled it. And I know that this because you've read my my other books, but I just wanted to make sure that I said that.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, the doomsayism also bothers me about the people go to extremes on a problem to enforce the precautionary principle. If we don't do this, we're doomed. Like Greta Thunberg. It's all over. Then why bother to try if if we're hopeless here? And it's the same thing with the AI. That statement signed by thousands of scientists and so forth. That we should shut down all these companies. Well, first of all, that's not going to happen. And second of all, why? What's the pathway from? I mean, that was what's his name, Yudkowsky's Time Magazine op-ed. We're all going to die, not just all humans. Every single living organism on Earth is going to die. Okay, how's this going to happen? You never get a straight answer about this. And but what about all the good stuff that AI could do? Solving human disease problems. Doing these calculations for drug trials, right, for example, take years when humans are doing it with our current computer system. Now it can be done in minutes by one of these AI. Yeah. All right, so again, but when people hear that, the end is coming and then it doesn't, they think, why should I believe the next thing you say? You said that this was going to happen and it didn't happen. And that's what bothers me about that.
Yeah, just to be clear, I'm not arguing that they should shut down the AI. I mean, the most promising thing that I read recently about AI is that they're now using it to predict who's going to get pancreatic cancer. Pancreatic cancer is the deadliest form of cancer because they almost never catch it early. I think the number was something like 12% of people actually, a cure rate or catch it early. But they're now using AI to go back through electronic medical records and find these data points that nobody was able to put together before about, did you have pancreatitis? Did you have this? Did you, things that go back years, that they would find these patterns that they can now predict 3 years in advance who's going to get pancreatic cancer,
Right.
which would be incredible. So, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm a cancer survivor. I think that's not a pancreatic, thank goodness. But I mean, I think that is the terrific thing. And I'm not arguing that they should shut down social media either. It's just that I think that there is a better way to go forward with it, which is to recognize that there are people out there who are going to abuse it. The worry that I have about AI is that right now, first thing I did when ChatGPT opened, the ChatGPT 4 was try to make it do disinformation, because this is what I do, right? What can I get it to say about the vaccines that's wrong? Couldn't get it to do it, which made me think, oh, so somebody's tweaking this. Somebody out there. I mean, it's not even scraping, because if you go out on your internet, you scrape enough, you're going to find some RFK Jr. stuff, and it's going to end up in what ChatGPT says. But it didn't, and I wondered why. And so I came to this conclusion that somebody must be tweaking it. But if they can tweak it for that, they can tweak it for disinformation too. In the wrong hands, AI can be weaponized. Should we get ahead of that? Should we try to figure it out? I think we should. There was a meeting, I don't know if it was the White House, but I know it was with the Biden administration the other day, where the AI execs got together and came up with a set of principles, to guide them going forward. They left some stuff out. It wasn't perfect, but I was encouraged to see that. So I'm not quite the doomsayer here, but I'm vigilant. I'm somebody who wants to get ahead of a problem and not let it overtake us.
I'm going to read it from your book here. I met Dave. This is you speaking. I met Dave and Aaron Neinhauser, the husband and wife team of former labor union organizers. When they helped me publicize a dinner I was hosting in eastern Pennsylvania to talk with coal miners about climate change. In their own work, that is it Neinhausers? Neinhausers go to Trump rallies where they film their encounters and trying to have respectful, convincing conversations about why their interlocutors should stop watching Fox News or give up the idea that Hillary Clinton belongs in prison. They then use these films to teach classes through their small nonprofit Hear Yourself Think, in which they train others to have more meaningful conversations across the partisan divide. Compared to the conversations I've had with flat earthers and other science-denizers, these are pretty brave folks, and they have been more than successful than I have, too. Cast your net a little wider, you'll run across Daryl Davis. I love his work, the African-American blues musician who's talked 200 people out of Ku Klux Klan. Steve Hassan, the former Moonie, I know Steve pretty well. He was on the show, too. Recommends similar techniques to talk people out of cults. You talk about street epistemology like Pete Boghossian does, and so on. The question is things like that and pre-bunking, do they work? And as a larger question, am I wasting my time publishing Skeptic magazine? Is it just being read by people who think all this other stuff is bullshit anyway? Or are people reading it and going, I didn't realize that. Okay, I changed my mind. And, pick your favorite example. Vanderlinden used the one of the Biden administration issuing a pre-bunking on the eve of Russia invading Ukraine. The intelligence agency knew this was going to happen and warning us Russia's going to have this false flag operation as a pretense to invading. And so be on the alert. And that was what they were going to do.
Yes. Yeah, it worked. And I mean, I'm a philosopher, so I got to get this exactly right. Sometimes nothing will work. But if anything will work, it is what Daryl Davis is doing, what Dave and Aaron Neinhauser are doing, what Eli Saslow talked about in his book, Rising Out of Hatred, where, talking people out of white supremacy. Face-to-face conversation, calm, respectful conversation. And you know where I learned that was from your Scientific American article. So I wrote that I forget the name of that article, but that was my inspiration for my book, How to Talk to a Science Denier, because that actually has not, to my knowledge, been empirically tested. They have tested whether you can debunk people, out of their beliefs, and sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. But what about the super, super hardcore people, the people who, just been marinating in the disinformation? And this is why I went to the Flat Earth Convention, to try this, to see if it was really possible. And what I learned from that is that I think you were right in that article, that there's something about face-to-face, calm, respectful conversation that at least humanizes the opposition. It doesn't always work, but it will work if anything will work. And here, and again, this is not scientific, but looking at the anecdotal literature, anytime you read about a hardcore denier changing their mind, that's how it's done. The hardcore deniers about vaccines, about climate, really about anything. If you dig a little deeper and you find out, well, now, how did you come to radically change your mind? It's always because somebody that they loved took the time, didn't alienate them, didn't call them stupid, didn't try to shove facts down their throat and, break off the relationship if they didn't listen. I think that that's the key. Now, is that also the key to our political difficulties? I don't know. But I'm really encouraged by the work that Dave and Aaron Nienhauser are doing. I mean, I encourage people to go to their website, hearyourselfthink.org, and look at the videos. I mean, they are out there at the Trump rallies where people are, screaming invective at them as they're, speaking. But by being calm, they will end up having respectful conversations. And then they teach seminars on how to have those respectful conversations. I'm a big advocate for that. But, you asked me at the opening of our conversation, why did I write my new book? Here's why. Because what I just described to you is not enough. It's like in an epidemic. Yes, you have to heal the sick. You have to go out, you have to treat the sick, you have to go out and talk to the people who are already, victimized by the disinformation and try to help them to, come back to reality. But you also have to exercise some preventive medicine. You got to remove that pump handle that's infecting everybody. And that's fighting the disinformation. So I really wrote this book because I realized at the end of writing How to Talk to a Science Denier that I hadn't done enough. I was just talking about how to deal with the believers, not the people who were making them believe. And that's where I think we really can also make a difference, choking off the amplification of the disinformation. You're never going to get Trump to stop. You're never going to get Putin to stop. Can we do more with the media outlets and the other ways that they're being amplified? I think we can. That's where I think we're going to be able to make a difference. And what I'm advocating, I don't want people to give up. You asked me why did I make I got one too. You asked me why did I make the book small? It's so tiny. Because I want people to carry it in their pocket and give it to a friend. I want them, I want this to be in their back pocket on the way to the revolution, right? This should be the book that helps them to realize, we're in an information war, and here's your training manual for what you can do to fight it. That's what I believe.
Yeah. That's a perfect place to end it there, Lee. I love the book. I love your work. That's all good. I do think respectful conversations like we're having here, where we disagree on some things or I push back or whatever, that's perfectly fine. It is hard to have those kind of conversations at I can't imagine going to a Trump rally with a camera crew and inciting that.
I know.
Those kinds of emotions.